unique kind of inner strength that men in constant relationships sometimes never develop. He learns to solve problems independently, manage his schedule, handle stress, and guide his own life without leaning on someone else for reassurance. During this period of solitude, he becomes aware of who he really is. Most people define themselves through relationships, through others, through the expectations society places on them. But a man who spends extended time alone gets the chance to understand his identity outside of romance, outside of validation, and outside of emotional dependency. He begins to learn what he likes, what he dislikes, what drains his energy, and what brings him peace. This self-awareness is priceless because it shapes the choices he will make in future relationships. He also begins to understand his emotional patterns more clearly. Without someone beside him to blame or rely on, he confronts his own insecurities, fears, and weaknesses. He sees the areas where he needs to grow, and he gets the chance to work on himself without distraction. This emotional growth makes him more stable, more grounded, and more capable of handling challenges. He becomes less reactive and more reflective. He understands how to process emotions instead of dumping them on someone else. This is one of the reasons why men who have spent a long time single often have much better emotional control later in life. Another major transformation is the development of discipline. When a man has no relationship to distract him, he starts focusing on his goals with sharp intensity. He wakes up earlier, works harder, trains consistently, and becomes more committed to his personal development. He realizes that his life is his responsibility, and he begins to build it brick by brick. This discipline doesn't come from external pressure, it grows from within. It comes from understanding that no one is coming to save him, no one is coming to fix his problems, and no one is obligated to carry his emotional weight. That realization forces growth. He also learns the difference between being alone and being lonely. In the beginning, they feel like the same thing. But over time, he discovers that solitude can be peaceful, empowering, and liberating. He becomes comfortable with his own company. He learns how to enjoy silence, how to enjoy his thoughts, and how to create a life that is fulfilling even without a partner. This comfort with solitude becomes one of his strongest qualities because it protects him from entering unhealthy relationships out of desperation or insecurity. As he grows more self-reliant, he also becomes more selective. He no longer feels the need to accept attention just because it's offered or enter a relationship just to feel wanted. He isn't looking for someone to complete him because he has already learned how to complete himself. This makes him far more intentional about the people he allows into his life. He wants alignment, not attachment. He wants peace, not chaos. He wants partnership, not dependency. And perhaps the biggest change is this: he starts to value himself differently. When a man spends a long time alone, he learns his worth through his daily effort, discipline, and growth. He sees what he brings to the table, and he recognizes the effort it took to become the man he is. This self-worth becomes a shield, protecting him from cheap love, toxic people, and emotionally draining relationships. His self-reliance is not coldness, it is wisdom. It is the result of silence, reflection, and growth. It is the strength that forms when a man realizes that he can build his own peace, create his own stability, and direct his own life without needing a relationship to hold him together. When a man has been without a relationship for a long time, he learns something that many people never understand. Not everyone deserves access to his energy. At first, this lesson doesn't come easily. He may have previously given his time, attention, and emotional effort to people who didn't appreciate him or relationships that drained him. But solitude is a powerful teacher, and over time, it reshapes the way he values his energy, his emotions, and his presence. A man who has been alone for a long period begins to notice how peaceful his life becomes without unnecessary complications. He becomes aware of how much emotional space he gains when he's not constantly giving his attention to someone who brings drama, confusion, or inconsistency. This peace becomes precious to him. Losing it even slightly feels like a threat to his mental stability. And once peace becomes a priority, selectiveness naturally follows. He starts paying attention to people's intentions, not just their words. When he interacts with someone, he observes their behavior, consistency, and emotional maturity. He no longer entertains people who drain him, confuse him, or expect him to carry the entire emotional load. Because he has lived without these problems for a long time, he now knows the difference between a peaceful mind and a disturbed one. He refuses to go back to a life filled with emotional noise simply because someone wants attention. This selectiveness is not about arrogance. It is about self-preservation. A man who has learned the value of his energy no longer wastes it on people who don't add value to his life. He becomes more aware of the types of emotional environments that damage him. He stays away from manipulation, passive-aggressive behavior, mixed signals, and relationships built on uncertainty. He does not chase, he does not beg, he does not force connections. Instead, he observes, he evaluates, and he chooses wisely. Spending a long time alone teaches him that not every opportunity is worth pursuing. Not every person is worth the risk. Not every attraction deserves investment. He learns to separate temporary interest from long-term compatibility. He learns to distinguish between someone who simply wants attention and someone who genuinely wants connection. This level of emotional clarity makes him more confident in his decisions. He becomes selective not only emotionally, but mentally and spiritually. He watches how people treat themselves, how they react under pressure, how they speak about others, and how they handle conflict. Because relationships require emotional investment, he takes time to understand whether a potential partner is capable of matching his effort. He knows what it feels like to be drained, and he refuses to allow that into his life again. A long period of singleness also sharpens his intuition. When he has no distractions, he starts to see people for who they really are. He listens more deeply, pays attention to the small signs, and trusts his instincts. If something feels off, he doesn't ignore it anymore. He has learned that ignoring red flags always leads to regret. So now he takes his time. He lets people reveal themselves naturally before giving them access to his emotions. He also becomes selective with his time. He invests his hours into things that bring growth, his fitness, his career, his goals, his passions. He doesn't waste time in meaningless conversations or short-term interactions that lead nowhere. He values his schedule because he knows the long-term benefits of disciplined living. When a man has spent years building himself alone, he won't let anyone disrupt his progress for momentary pleasure or emotional convenience. And one of the biggest shifts is that he stops trying to impress anyone. When he was younger or emotionally inexperienced, he may have felt the need to prove his worth to people. But after spending time alone, he learns that the right person will recognize his value without him having to compete for attention. He no longer overextends himself. He no longer gives more than he receives. He no longer sacrifices his peace for companionship. This is why a man who has been alone for a long time becomes harder to manipulate. He sees through superficial charm. He recognizes emotional inconsistency. He doesn't fall for flattery, temporary affection, or dramatic displays of interest. Because he has lived with peace, he refuses to trade it for chaos. His selectiveness is a sign of emotional maturity. It shows that he values himself, his growth, and his future. He knows that giving someone access to his life is a privilege, not a right. and he will only offer that privilege to someone who respects his energy, matches his effort, and brings genuine peace to his world. When a man has been without a relationship for a long time, one of the most powerful transformations he experiences is the development of a deep, unshakable sense of purpose. Without the emotional noise, without the constant need to maintain a connection, and without the distractions that often come with relationships, he finally gains the mental clarity required to understand what he truly wants out of life. This solitude becomes a fertile ground for discovering his mission, his goals, and his identity as a man. In a relationship, especially in the wrong one, a man can easily lose himself. He may spend years trying to satisfy someone else, trying to make things work, or trying to keep peace in a situation that drains him. But when he steps away from all that, and he remains alone for an extended period, he begins to reclaim the parts of himself that were neglected or forgotten. This is when purpose begins to rise. He starts asking bigger questions. Who am I? What am I here for? What do I want my life to look like? What legacy am I supposed to leave behind? These questions are the foundation of his transformation. They push him to explore areas of his life he never had time or energy for. He begins investing in himself, his health, his mind, his career, his dreams. He starts building habits that strengthen him rather than drain him. He becomes more disciplined, more focused, and more driven. Without a relationship to distract him, he channels his emotional energy into self-improvement. His mind sharpens, his vision clears, his priorities align. The longer he remains single, the more he begins to understand the importance of growth. He realizes that success is not accidental, it is intentional. He uses his solitude as a form of training. While others waste time chasing attention or validation, he is building a future. He spends time learning, reading, studying, and developing skills. He sets goals that once felt out of reach, and step by step, he starts achieving them. This process builds confidence, real confidence, not the kind based on compliments or flirtation, but the kind built on results, consistency, and progress. A man without a relationship begins to value silence because silence allows him to hear his inner voice. In that quiet space, he discovers what excites him, what scares him, what drives him, and what he was born to do. He stops chasing instant gratification and starts working on long-term fulfillment. He understands that purpose requires sacrifice, discipline, and patience, three qualities that flourish in solitude. This sense of purpose also changes the way he views relationships. He no longer seeks someone to fill emotional gaps or distract him from his own insecurities. Instead, he wants a partner who aligns with his mission. Purpose becomes his filter. If someone does not support his growth, respect his vision, or bring peace to his journey, he naturally distances himself. His purpose protects him from settling for someone who might pull him in the wrong direction. Purpose also makes him stronger emotionally. A man with a mission does not break easily. He does not fall apart when things go wrong. He does not depend on a relationship to feel valuable or complete. He knows who he is and where he is going. This inner stability becomes one of his strongest qualities. It allows him to remain calm under pressure, focused during chaos, and committed even during setbacks. And because he has been alone for a long time, he has had the opportunity to fail privately, learn quietly, and grow consistently. He has built resilience. Every challenge he faced alone has made him more confident in his ability to overcome obstacles. He knows he can rely on himself, not because he wants to, but because he had to. This deep sense of purpose becomes his compass. It guides his decisions, shapes his lifestyle, and influences the people he chooses to let into his life. He becomes protective of his goals, his time, and his energy. He knows what he is working toward, and he refuses to let anyone distract him or pull him backward. A man who has developed a strong purpose is not easily shaken. He walks with direction. He moves with intention. He lives with meaning. And whether he is alone or in a relationship, his purpose remains the foundation of his strength, his confidence, and his future. When a man spends a long time without a relationship, one of the most profound changes that happens inside him is the development of strong emotional control. This transformation doesn't occur overnight. It forms slowly through silence, self-reflection, challenges, and moments where he has no one to lean on but himself. Emotional control becomes a natural result of learning how to navigate life independently. At first, solitude exposes his emotional weaknesses. Without a partner to comfort him, reassure him, or distract him, he has no choice but to face his emotions directly. The frustration, the loneliness, the fears, the doubts, everything rises to the surface. And while many people try to escape these feelings by jumping into new relationships, he doesn't. He stays, he endures, and he learns. Over time, this process builds emotional strength and maturity that cannot be faked or fast-tracked. A man who has been single for a long time learns how to calm himself during stress. He becomes his own emotional anchor. In a relationship, it's easy to depend on another person for emotional balance, but being alone forces him to develop inner stability. He learns to process emotions instead of reacting impulsively. He learns to think before speaking, to reflect before acting, and to manage his feelings rather than letting them control him. This gives him a kind of maturity that makes him better equipped for future relationships. Emotional control also comes from the discipline he builds over time. When he has no one to impress, no one to perform for, and no one demanding emotional attention, he starts focusing on improving his responses to life. He notices how anger drains his energy, how impulsive decisions create problems, and how reacting quickly often leads to regret. Because of this awareness, he begins to practice patience. He becomes more measured, more thoughtful, and more intentional. When life hits him hard, and it always does, he no longer looks for someone to rescue him emotionally. Instead, he develops resilience. He becomes the type of man who handles challenges with a steady mindset. When things fall apart, he doesn't panic. When people disappoint him, he doesn't collapse. He stays centered. He knows that he has survived difficult moments before, and he trusts himself to survive more. This internal steadiness is one of the most attractive qualities a man can possess. Emotional control also teaches him how to walk away from situations that threaten his peace. When a man has spent a long time with peace and stability, he becomes extremely sensitive to anything that disturbs his inner world. He refuses to engage in unnecessary arguments, emotional manipulation, or disrespectful behavior. He doesn't react out of anger or insecurity. Instead, he chooses distance. He chooses silence. He chooses self-respect. This doesn't mean he becomes emotionless. It means he becomes emotionally wise. He knows when to express himself and when to stay silent. He knows what deserves his attention and what does not. He knows how to handle rejection, disappointment, and conflict without losing control. This emotional maturity gives him power that many men never develop because they never allow themselves to be alone long enough to learn it. Another major part of emotional control is understanding boundaries. A man who has been alone for a long time knows exactly what behaviors he can tolerate and what he cannot. He refuses to be dragged into emotional chaos. He refuses to invest in relationships where he feels disrespected or manipulated. He sees the signs early, and because he has emotional control, he walks away without guilt or hesitation. This emotional discipline also protects him from becoming too attached too quickly. He has learned the difference between genuine connection and emotional dependency. He doesn't confuse attention with affection or excitement with compatibility. He controls his emotions so he doesn't fall for illusions, temporary chemistry, or superficial promises. He stays grounded, realistic, and observant. A man who has built strong emotional control becomes a fortress. Not a cold fortress, but a stable one. People cannot easily influence his decisions, trigger his emotions, or knock him off balance. He is calm under pressure, firm in his values, and steady in his reactions. This strength makes him more confident, more focused, and more effective in every area of his life. And perhaps the most powerful thing emotional control gives him is freedom. Without emotional chaos, he can think clearly. Without impulsiveness, he makes better decisions. Without neediness, he chooses healthier relationships. Emotional control becomes his shield, his strength, and his silent power. When a man has been without a relationship for a long time, he doesn't enter one casually anymore. He has lived enough life alone to understand the difference between emotional comfort and emotional commitment. He knows what peace feels like, and he refuses to trade that peace for something shallow or temporary. Because of this, he becomes extremely intentional about who he chooses, when he chooses, and why he chooses. He values a relationship only when it's real, genuine, stable, and aligned with the future he's building. A man who has been single for years has learned the beauty of emotional clarity. He no longer chases the excitement of early attraction. He doesn't get blinded by physical appearance or temporary chemistry. He goes deeper. He looks for consistency, maturity, peace, and emotional depth. He pays attention to how a woman communicates, how she handles stress, how she treats people, and how she behaves when no one is watching. He has no interest in drama, games, mixed signals, or emotional immaturity. He wants a connection that feels calm, natural, and honest. Because he has spent so much time alone, he has also learned the value of emotional safety. He understands that real relationships are built on trust, not suspicion, not insecurity, not jealousy. He wants someone whose presence feels like home, not a battlefield, someone he can be himself with, someone he can talk to without fear of judgment, someone who understands the weight he carries and the path he is walking. He no longer tolerates relationships where he must explain his worth or fight for basic respect. This man has outgrown the need to impress anyone. His solitude taught him that his value is defined by his actions, his growth, and his integrity, not by how much someone loves him. So when he finally chooses to give his heart, it is not a desperate attempt to feel complete. It is a conscious decision to share his already complete life with someone who deserves a place in it. He knows that love should not drain him, it should build him. He has also learned to measure relationships by their long-term potential, not their short-term excitement. Temporary attention does nothing for him. Emotional highs without emotional intelligence mean nothing. He wants partnership, not just romance. He wants alignment, not just attraction. He wants a woman who shares his values, supports his purpose, and builds with him instead of slowing him down. He sees relationships as a long-term investment, something precious, something sacred, something worth protecting. Because he has lived alone for so long, he notices everything. He pays attention to tone, effort, intentions, and consistency. He values loyalty deeply because he knows how hard it is to come by. He values communication because he understands the damage caused by silence and misunderstanding. He values stability because he has spent years creating it for himself. He values maturity because he knows how much emotional chaos can destroy a man's focus, dreams, and peace. So when he finally decides to open his heart, he enters with clarity, not confusion. He gives with purpose, not desperation. He loves with intention, not fear. He chooses a woman not because he needs her, but because he wants her truly, deeply, consciously. A man who has been alone for a long time is not afraid of commitment. He is afraid of committing to the wrong person. He is not afraid of love. He is afraid of losing himself in the wrong kind of love. This is why he values real relationships more than anyone else. He knows how precious emotional peace is. He knows how hard he has worked to build himself. He knows what it costs to heal from the wrong relationship, and he will not gamble his heart unless he sees something real, something pure, something worth the wait. A man who has walked through years of solitude becomes a different kind of man. He is wiser, calmer, sharper, and more grounded. He has built himself from the inside out. He has healed wounds no one knows about. He has created a peaceful life that he will protect at all costs. And because he has lived without love for so long, he understands its true value. When he finally gives his heart, he gives it with strength, loyalty, and intention. He loves deeply, not recklessly. He commits fully, not temporarily. He chooses carefully because he knows real relationships are rare and real love is sacred. The woman who earns his heart won't receive an incomplete man. She will receive a man who has grown alone, matured alone, healed alone, and strengthened himself alone, so he can love with depth, clarity, and purpose. That is why the longer a man has been without a relationship, the more seriously he takes love when it finally arrives.